Welcome to Talk Travel with Heather Tate, North Mississippi's podcast for savvy travelers. Talk Travel with Heather Tate is a weekly podcast that airs every Monday on the Shark 102.3 FM radio station based in Ripley, Mississippi, and is then released as a podcast. Travel advisor and travel enthusiast Heather Tate of Whimsical Destinations gives listeners expert travel tips curated through the years of personal and professional experience. By clicking subscribe, you'll have a new travel tip to add to your collection delivered to your podcast library every Monday. Talk Travel with Heather Tate is brought to you by Sun Bear Studio. Sun Bear Studio is a boutique recording studio in the heart of Ripley, Mississippi. When you record with us at Sun Bear Studio, we can mix, master, register, and publish your music, your podcast, or your family story. Email us when you're ready at sunbear@jc.media.
This program was recorded at Sun Bear Studio in Ripley, Mississippi.
Good morning, Northeast Mississippi travelers. This is Heather with Talk Travel with Heather Tate, and I am so excited to share my adventures and tried and true tips with you, whether you are also a seasoned traveler, a hopeful traveler, or currently an armchair traveler, meaning you're going to follow along with us from home for now. This is our 100th episode of Talk Travel with Heather Tate, and I'm going to be honest. Originally, I planned on doing something like really big and special for our 100th episode, but then instead, I had this topic that's very important to me, and it was just on my heart to share it. And I thought, you know what? This is perfect for the 100th episode. And I'm calling it, I Don't Want to Do That. And you're like, well, what do you mean? What happens when you meet resistance on a trip? Whether it's, activities, a meal, where you're going to stay. This resistance could come from your kids, your spouse, maybe other travelers with you. So what do you do to counter that? I am very fortunate to be married to someone who loves travel, like I do. But if you know Logan Tate, you know that I have gotten really good over the years of answering this question. What happens when you meet resistance? I think Logan, in the first maybe 12 years of our marriage, he liked to say no or put up resistance for things just to see how hard I would fight to do them. So I got really good at this. But now I think, as he's aged and matured, become much wiser, has realized that I'm not going to give up. I'm going to keep fighting until I win. And he's just decided to make it easier on himself. Or maybe he's just realized that I'm pretty good at what I do and I have really good ideas when we go on trips, and he's just decided to not resist me. Either way, he's gotten easier as he's gotten older. So I will give him credit for that. But especially initially, when we got married, there was not a trip I planned that wasn't going to have some kind of resistance. So what do you do? Are you the person that's always pushing? And I'm a self-proclaimed pusher when it comes to traveling, to do more. Like Logan is a less is more kind of person when it comes to trips, especially. He wants to have time to chill and relax. He doesn't want activities from the moment his eyelids open and I'm, usually sometimes standing there staring at him, waiting for him to wake up, or pushing him and shaking him until he wakes up and then pretending like I didn't. He's a less is more person and I'm a more is more person. And those two people usually end up together. I don't know how it happens or why it happens, but it does. The universe thinks it's funny, I think, but we balance each other, right? So he helps me make time to relax on trips. Sometimes he would laugh at that, but he doesn't know how much I really do have to rein myself in. But I force him outside of his comfort zone. And most of the time, I venture to say 95% of the time, the things that I push him to do, afterwards he tells me he is glad he did. But he's just he's that person that is going to be resistant at first. So what are some things that you can do if you're the person that's the pusher, or if you're the person being pushed? What are some ways that we can compromise where you're not feeling tugged and you're not feeling like you're everything that you suggest, you're hitting a wall when it comes to it, where the point where you both want to throw your hands up at the end of a trip or in the middle of the trip and say, why are we even doing this? Why do we even come on this trip? Because we want to have two different types of experiences. You want to do everything and I want to do nothing. So how do you meet in the middle? Okay. So how do you encourage your fellow travelers to be more receptive? Here's some ways. Plan for flexibility. I'm telling you that I was not always the most flexible person when it came to traveling. And this is something I have learned. Having children really transformed the way I travel. Just because I'm more tired now than I used to be. You can ask Logan, I was the Energizer Bunny of travel. When we were first married, those first 4 years, I did not have an itinerary that was too full for me. I could do 10 things in a day. I could fit in 6 things in a day. day. Like I was always going from one thing to the next with very little break in between. And sometimes Logan would have to mutiny on me. There's times he sat down on the pavement and refused to go any further. Literally sat down on the pavement. And this is someone who is OCD and does not like sitting where people are walking. And said that he would not go another step unless it was towards a restaurant so he could eat. So Logan has had to do that before with me because I could just keep going. But after having children, I'm a little more tired. I'll admit, after being 40, I'm a little more tired. So it is not as difficult to convince me to relax as it used to be. But planning for flexibility, give yourself some downtime. Our 7th anniversary trip to Paris that I mentioned a few weeks ago, it's one of my favorite trips I've ever taken to Europe. And that is because it was the first trip I took to Europe where I intentionally built in downtime because I didn't know how London was going to handle it. He was almost 2, so he was a toddler. And I realized that Logan and toddlers are kind of on the same schedule where you need to make sure that they eat, you need to make sure that they sleep, and they have time to rest, and then they won't be cranky. So I started learning how to manage Logan better as I had children. So I realized, I've got to plan for some downtime. We have to have time where we are just going to sit in a park and have a picnic. And then I realized how much I love that, how much I've missed by running from activity to activity, that I'm missing the place and the people by not just taking time to people watch, to rest, to take part of an afternoon, a Sunday afternoon in the park where we get ice cream and we walk around and we see street performers. And, we watch a puppet show or let London blow giant bubbles and run through them, or get a little sailboat, rent a tiny little sailboat that you can steer with a stick. Like these type of things that I would have totally missed, walked right past in my efforts to go from thing to thing. So plan for flexibility, give yourself downtime, not over planning. Let everyone pick one activity that they really want to do, and the others have to be open to that activity. Now, I'm not saying it's going to be an episode of Fear Factor where you're like, we're going skydiving on this trip and everybody's got to do it. I'm not saying that. Phobias aside, maybe everybody's not going to be able to handle whitewater rafting, right? Or there are things that people are just, I cannot do that. Scuba diving is not going to be something I want to do. But have an activity where a mild to moderate activity then that everybody could take part in. And that is the activity that we're going to make sure that each person gets to do, and no one in the group is allowed to complain about it. Because it really rains on people's parade when you're super excited to maybe go to that Broadway play in New York. Or maybe the horse-drawn carriage through Central Park is on your list. Or maybe it's going to the Statue of Liberty, or getting to go to the top of the Empire State Building. That's what's on your list. And if everybody else in the group is complaining or making you feel rushed, making you feel bad for taking time to do that, then you're not going to enjoy it. So whatever that one activity is, the whole group, whether it's just a couple, whether it's your nuclear family, maybe you're going on a graduation trip, but everybody then needs to account for what is one thing that you want to be able to do and no one can complain. They have to at least be open to it. My other tip is at least try. I told you last week to bring up that we went on a catamaran ride and we went to the islands in the Grenadines. Now, I will admit that earlier this week when I had planned to do an excursion, an all-day excursion where we went to a waterfall and crossed a bamboo bridge and went and saw 13 rocks that we're still trying to find out the mystery behind these 13 rocks. And that we got to go to a local place for lunch and tour the film side of Pirates of the Caribbean. It was a full day. And so I promised Logan a down day where we did nothing but enjoy the resort and the pools and the beach. And I am going to admit that I lied to my husband because I found out that I had the opportunity that we could take a catamaran to the Grenadine Islands and we could go to Mystique and we could go to Bequia. And I was like, this is a once in a lifetime experience. What if we don't come back to St. Vincent, or it's years till we come back? I want to do this. I think we should do this. And he was a little resistant, but he's like, you know what? Okay, we'll do it. He was a good sport. And guess what he got to do because of that? He got to swim with turtles. We didn't know that he was going to get to swim with turtles. I didn't know I was going to get to swim with turtles. And if he had known that, it would have been an easier sell for him because, like I said last week, he loves turtles and has never been able to truly swim with them. Like we've seen one in passing in snorkeling where it was like a glimpse and he was gone. But this is like we hovered over the surface and just watched the sea turtle for like 30 minutes. He wasn't doing anything but just eating and just moving around. So we were with that turtle. I had to move out of the way when one of the turtles came to the surface because he was so close. And because he at least tried it, he got to have one of the best experiences of his entire trip. Now, there's a little bit more I could say about that, so I will. So Logan and snorkeling. He's always resistant when I say I want to go snorkeling because he doesn't just love being in water. He doesn't. But every time we go snorkeling, I'm telling you, he is a better snorkeler than I am. I'm the one that always wants to go, and then he's always the one that ends up being more comfortable than I am once I'm actually in the water. But I love snorkeling. I love going to different places, seeing coral reefs, love seeing the fish and the animals, and hopefully getting to see something amazing like turtles. And Logan loves it after he's done it. And he will say, thank you for making me do that. I'm glad that I did that. But having to dread it ahead of time is not something he looks forward to. That's all the time we have for this edition of Talk Travel with Heather Tate. Remember, if you're not already on our Facebook group, Heather and Logan Tate Whimsical Destinations, we'd love to have you join us there. Life is short. Take the trip. Make those memories. You won't regret it. Tune in next week. Okay, so being open to it. So maybe someone in your family, they don't love the idea of snorkeling, but then get on the boat. Maybe you don't get in the water. Maybe you're like, I will be the photographer for the group and I will take your pictures in the water. And you have to also be okay with that. If you want to be together and you want this to be a family experience, but maybe your family member's like, I don't want to swing off a rope and jump into the waterfall. I don't want to climb the waterfall. I don't want to zip line, but I'm happy to be here and hold your stuff while you do that. At least go. Get on the boat. Take the excursion, be there, and don't complain. And if you're the one that is asking for them to take part in that activity, then meet them halfway. And if they're telling you, I don't want to zip line, I'm not comfortable zip lining, but I'm happy to be there and to encourage you and to support you while you want to do it, then be okay with that. And don't make them feel bad that they don't want to do the activity. So that's part of it, is reaching a compromise. At least trying as much as you can for the activity. If it's like, I can get in the water, but I'm not putting my head under when it comes to snorkeling, I just want to be there. That's what Christian does sometimes. Sometimes he does not want to put his head in when we snorkel, but he will physically be in the water with us and will hold my hand or will hold a guide's hand, but he just does not want to put his head under the water. Then that's okay. When it comes to food, some adults and some kids, we're going to be honest, sometimes it's just as much adults as kids, are picky eaters. So there's a restaurant that you really want to go to, but there is not something on the menu that they think that they're going to like. But that is the one place you're excited to go. It means something to you. Then everybody be open to it. But also then be okay if maybe they're just going to get a drink and a side or an appetizer. And you stopped by and let them get a Subway sandwich or Chick-fil-A, or, you had food in your condo before, room service when you get back. Like, make concessions. And it's like, okay, they're going to go and they're not going to complain. But I'm going to make sure that they have something to eat too. So if there's not anything that they're willing to try, maybe there is, maybe there isn't. Maybe they end up going, it ends up being their favorite restaurant. That's the thing. Sometimes we're resistant to do things that end up being our favorite moment of the trip, our favorite restaurant, our favorite activity. But we wouldn't have even done them if someone else in our group hadn't asked, hadn't pushed us to do that. So whether it's an activity or maybe it's a restaurant, try the place. Try the activity. Meet each other halfway. Another way, if you're sensing a lot of resistance, and I found, remove the electronics from the group. If you're traveling with preteens, teens, elementary school kids, husbands or wives, and there's resistance and there's grumbling or there's people not being excited and on board with what you want to do, ask yourself, are we on our phones too much? Are we on our devices, our tablets? Are we watching too much TV? Remove the electronics and watch the attitudes improve. I've had to do this to myself. I've had to do this with my kids. And I will not say that I've had to do this to my husband, but I'll let you read between those lines, right? Remove the electronics and the conversation at dinner will be so much richer than if you had them. Okay, so things I would have missed out on. Now, I started thinking of things that I would have missed out on if I hadn't let Logan decide some things that we would do. And 3 things come to mind. Parasailing, because I don't just love heights. I'm more comfortable with water. Logan's more comfortable with air. So go figure, right? So I probably would never have parasailed if Logan hadn't really shown interest in it. I would have easily backed out of that. I'm glad I had that experience. I do not have to do that again anytime soon. Ziplining. I would not have done it if Logan hadn't done it first. And that ended up being one of my favorite experiences when we went to YS Falls in Jamaica, was ziplining. Resting, I've already told you. I would not be a good rester if I had not married Logan. I probably would still be running from activity to activity. But I had to learn ways then, how can I enjoy resting more? So that's what you have to ask yourself. Like, if it's an activity that your spouse loves to do, what can you do to make that activity more enjoyable for you? And it's easy for me. Reading. I love reading. I cannot just lay on a beach for long periods of time and not do anything. But if you give me a book, I can be there for hours. So Logan can take a nap and I can read my book and we're both happy. So we had to find ways to make it resting more enjoyable for me. If I'm going to have a picnic, then it needs to be in a beautiful location where I can also people watch and then I'm good, or take pictures and I'm good. So I had to find ways to make what he enjoys doing more enjoyable for me, and now I love it just as much as him. So ask yourself, how can you compromise? How can you be more receptive to doing the things that your family, your spouse wants to do when they go on a trip? Most people dread the new things, but then they are glad that they tried them. They'll end up being your favorite memories of the trip if you just give it a chance. So ask yourself, the very next trip you're planning on going on, have this conversation ahead of time with your family. Say your kids are going. We're going to Niagara Falls coming up very soon. So in our group of us discussing like things we want to do, everybody gets to have like, what is one thing you want to do? Now, London thinks he is ziplining over the falls. And like I said, there are times when you have to veto something. I am not comfortable with my 12-year-old ziplining over Niagara Falls at this moment. But I have to then find something else as a compromise. There's a ropes course that I would be more comfortable with him and Christian doing if that's what he wants to do. So finding those activities then, letting everyone take ownership of the trip by choosing a restaurant, an activity, an experience. Where we stayed was something very important to me, to be able to have a view of the falls. And then our second place that we're staying, we're going with friends. And letting them, then I let them choose, where do you want to stay for our second place? And they found a really cool Airbnb that we're going to stay in, that we're going to share. We each have our own space, but we're together and we have a living room where we can play games. We can talk about the end of our trip. So finding ways to compromise when you're traveling with other people, whether it's people within your household or people outside your household, compromising and turning, I don't want to do that, into what can make this more fun and enjoyable for everyone. So everybody ends up enjoying the trip more. That's all the time we have for this week's episode of Talk Travel with Heather Tate. If you're not a member of our Facebook group, Heather and Logan Tate Whimsical Destinations, please go over and join it. You'll see lots of tips, pictures, ideas for your next adventure. Life is short. Take the trip. Make those memories. You won't regret it.
This show is made possible by JC Media, LLC in Ripley, Mississippi. JC Media owns the Shark 102.3 Classic Rock FM radio station where the show is hosted, and Sun Bear Recording Studio where the interviews are recorded. We need your feedback and support. If you listen to the podcast on a player like iTunes, Google Podcasts, or Amazon Music, please subscribe to the show and leave us a review. We also have an email in which you can share your feedback. That email is theshark1023@gmail.com. Subscribe to our podcast on your favorite app or stream episodes online at shark1023.com/podcasts. Today's episode was produced by Melinda Marsalis. It was edited by Rick Williams and engineered by Chris Marsalis. The podcast technician is Joyce Grady.